Working with the Cecilia string quartet, who are now disbanded, that was a pretty great experience. In particular, the live performance that they did of my quartet. Often the experience of just working with performers and kind of exchanging ideas was really satisfying, even if the whole process felt kind of compressed into not enough time. But that kind of intense collaboration can be pretty special. The opera from scratch workshop that I participated in one year, that was pretty memorable in a sense, because I had the opportunity to work really closely with one singer, and that was one of those cases where the piece kind of came to life in a way that I hadn't completely expected. It seemed like neither I nor the singer was quite sure what to do with the piece. And then at some point in the middle of the week, I feel as if she sort of found a new aspect of this character. And this is one of those cases where she actually found the humor and playfulness in the music that had been there all along, that I hadn't quite been fully conscious of, and just really kind of decided to ham up this performance in a way. So there were multiple people contributing to the character. There was a real life person who lived earlier in the 20th century, who the character was based on. And then there was Helen Creighton's retelling of her story. And then there was my music and Jayani's portrayal of the character. That somehow these individuals kind of synthesized together into a new character in a way. And so watching that character come to life, that was pretty memorable in a way. It can. New music can be popular. A lot of 80s pop wouldn't have happened without Steve Reich, for example, and vice versa. I think there is a lot of mutual influence there. I mean, certainly the New York minimalists, they were all listening to punk as well. They were listening to downtown New York punk, and then Duran Duran copied Steve Reich to some extent, and how they use synthesizers and set up these patterns of arpeggios, and use the kind of repurpose them for different aims, but the influence is definitely there. I think of also my music as having occupying some kind of middle ground between what's often described as accessible versus what you might call kind of clenched-jawed high modernism or whatever. I'm thinking of Milton Babbitt's ideas, which were often probably misinterpreted to some extent, but I think he had this idea that making progress in music was somehow more important than appealing to a wide audience, and I think there is room for that type of thinking. Do you necessarily want to be liked by a large number of people? I don't know. As I said a minute ago, some of the times when I feel a piece is successful are when people have different reactions to it, and maybe not everybody likes it. Some people like it, and others think it's maybe not their cup of tea. And I think there's plenty of room for art in general that doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody's taste. People have different tastes, and that's fine. Or a different thing will strike different people depending on what moment they're at in their life or whatever. I went into academic training because I sort of perceived this need to learn more about how to get the thoughts in my head into, into the language that musicians could read, how to give form to my ideas. Certainly my academic training helped give me the language, or not give me the language, but it helped translate my ideas into reality. Sometimes I do think theoretically when I'm writing. I go back and forth, with some pieces I start with a fairly abstract idea. I might start with a sort of theoretical concept, like, a pitch class set or something, and kind of work outward from that to create a piece. So sometimes I fairly directly use theoretical ideas as part of the process of generating my own ideas. Sometimes I tend to work a little bit more intuitively, and so sometimes that influence of my academic training is a little bit less direct, but I think it's there always kind of informing how I think of what the possibilities are, or the range of possibilities. But I guess the other important thing about academic training, besides sort of the content of it, or specific things I might have learned, the sort of overlooked thing is that it's also a kind of social induction in a way, right? It's a chance to meet people with similar interests, and so that's one of the ways that it was really valuable for me, beyond anything that you might think of as specifically academic training. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of my teacher, Gary Kulesha, who I worked with while I was at the University of Toronto, and I remember him saying at one point, I don't remember how he worded it exactly, but he said something like, it's not really your job to decide whether what you're doing is relevant or not. Other people decide that. The best you can do is just do what you can do. And, and I think from another teacher I heard something sort of related to that, which is write the music that only you can write. And I've sort of interpreted that in different ways at different stages of my development, I guess. But I think it's useful advice in the sense that you do what you need to do, and then to a certain extent, how that fits into the context around it is out of your control after a certain point, right? Or how it gets received is to a certain extent out of your control.
Yeah.
Go to as many concerts as you can, like listen to live music. I remember actually a student, like an undergrad, who was kind of interested in composing. I remember asked me that question about advice at one point, and I think in retrospect, I sort of I gave her advice that probably wasn't the best advice. I was still very much in academic mode, and I had all these ideas about, look at Bartók scores or whatever, which there's nothing wrong with looking at Bartók scores. That's great, and it helped me a lot. But I think if I had thought about it a little bit longer, and I did think about it like for a few days after she asked me, I realized, no, I think actually the best advice I could have given her was go to lots of concerts, find out about new music events happening in Toronto and just go to a lot. And you'll probably hear a lot of things that maybe seems kind of weird and maybe you don't like at first, and that's part of the experience too. You sort of you get a sense of what the possibilities are, and some of those possibilities are going to be what you're interested in and some of them are not, and they're all part of that experience of helping you form what your ideas are. The person sitting right here is Patrick McGraw. I might give you a different answer to that question than I would have, say, before the pandemic. Experiences change us all. The fact that I kind of drifted from science to music is still a big part of who I am, and it influences everything I do. But, I guess I sometimes feel as if I don't fit very comfortably into a lot of different categories. I followed a slightly unconventional path into music and found my way into it late in a way. In a lot of ways, I was a bit of a late bloomer in my life, which I wouldn't have necessarily, people who knew me as a kid wouldn't necessarily have thought of it that way. They probably would have thought I had this precocious interest in the sciences, or that I developed that really early. And yet in retrospect, I kind of think, well, okay, that was partly true, but in a lot of ways, I was actually kind of a late bloomer. It took me a long time to kind of figure out what was important and to figure out how to balance the different things that are important. The more intellectual side of my life and the more directly embodied experience of music, how to connect those things, how all of those interact with personal relationships. That took really a lot of trial and error, I think, to figure out, and I guess I wouldn't necessarily say that I've still figured it out. It's still a work in progress. So who am I? I'm a work in progress. That's it.